Let's dive into today's story. Carl Blevins had driven 6 hours through rain and rush hour traffic to reach his son's apartment in the city. He hadn't announced the visit, hadn't called ahead. Something in Corey's voice during their last phone conversation, a tremor, a hesitation had lodged itself in Carl's chest like a splinter. At 52, Carl had learned to trust his instincts. They kept him alive through 2 tours in Iraq and a decade running his construction business in a town where handshake deals still mattered. The apartment building was one of those converted warehouses in a neighborhood that couldn't decide if it was up and coming or still dangerous. Carl took the stairs to the 3rd floor, his boots echoing in the concrete stairwell. He'd raised Corey to be independent, to handle his problems, but Carl also knew what it looked like when a man was drowning. He knocked. Corey opened the door looking thinner than he had at Christmas. The kid was 26 now, working some data entry job that Carl knew was below his capabilities. Corey had been pre-med once, brilliant and driven, until his mother Natalie died 4 years ago. Pancreatic cancer, 6 weeks from diagnosis to funeral. Corey had taken a semester off to help Carl arrange everything, and somehow never made it back. "Dad." Corey's smile didn't reach his eyes. "What are you doing here?" "Passing through. Thought I'd take you to dinner." Carl stepped inside before Corey could manufacture an excuse. The apartment was clean, but sparse: a couch, a desk with a laptop, a kitchen table. No photographs, no personality. Like a place someone was camping in rather than living. That's when Carl saw it. A whiteboard hung on the wall near the kitchen, the kind with a monthly calendar grid. Most squares were empty, but someone had marked thick black X's on specific Thursdays. 4. In the past 2 months, another one coming up next week. "What are these?" Carl pointed. Corey went pale. Actually pale, like someone had opened a drain and let his blood run out. "Nothing. Just bad days for me." "Bad days how?" "Work stuff. You know, deadlines. Stressful projects." Corey was a terrible liar. He always had been. Even at 8 years old, trying to convince Carl he hadn't eaten the last cookie, he'd get that same look, eyes sliding left, hands fidgeting. Carl let it drop. He took Corey to a steakhouse, watched his son push food around his plate, making all the right noises about work and the gym membership he'd bought. Carl paid the check and drove Corey home, hugged him goodbye, and started the 6-hour drive back. But he only made it 20 miles before he pulled into a rest stop, sat in his truck, and called Jay Kemp. Jay had been Carl's staff sergeant in Iraq, and now ran a private investigation firm in Denver. "I need you to look into my son," Carl said. Quietly. "What's going on?" "I don't know yet. But something is." Jay called back 3 days later with a preliminary report. Corey's financials were clean, too clean. No credit card debt. No outstanding loans. For a kid making $38,000 a year in an expensive city, that was impossible. His bank statements showed regular deposits from his employer and regular withdrawals in cash. Large amounts. $1,500, $2,000, sometimes $3,000. Always within a few days of those marked Thursdays. "He's paying someone," Jay said. "Or someone's paying him." Carl thought about the X's, about Corey's hollow eyes. Keep digging. The next Thursday was 10 days away. Carl told his foreman he'd be gone for a while, packed a bag, and drove back to the city. He checked into a motel 3 blocks from Corey's building and waited. He'd learned patience in the military. You could sit in a hide site for 18 hours watching a target, waiting for the right moment. This was different. This was his son, the kid he'd taught to throw a football, the teenager who'd cried in Carl's arms when Natalie died. Carl sat in his truck across from the apartment building, drinking bad coffee, watching the entrance. Thursday came. Corey left for work at 7:30 in the morning, looking normal. He came home at 6, carrying takeout. Carl waited. At 8 o'clock, a black SUV pulled up outside the building. 2 men got out, one massive, built like a linebacker, the other lean and sharp-featured in an expensive suit. They went inside. Carl got out of his truck. He changed into dark clothes, pulled a baseball cap low. The building's security was a joke, a broken intercom, a door that didn't latch properly. He slipped inside, took the stairs to the 3rd floor, and moved quietly down the hall. Corey's door was closed. Carl heard voices inside, muffled. He moved past it to the apartment next door, where a fire escape zigzagged down the building's exterior. The window was open, someone's attempt at air circulation in a building with no AC. Carl climbed through, earning a startled gasp from a young woman on the couch. "Sorry," Carl whispered. "Emergency. I'll be gone in a minute." He stepped out onto the fire escape. Corey's window was 15 feet away, curtains drawn but not completely. Carl moved carefully. The metal was old, rusted in places. He reached the window and looked inside. What he saw made his heart stop. Corey was on his knees in the middle of the living room. The massive man stood over him with a steel baton. As Carl watched, frozen in horror, the man swung the baton into Corey's ribs. Corey grunted, doubled over, but didn't cry out. The man in the suit was filming it on his phone, circling to get different angles. "That's for the DUI," the suit said. "3 more for the assault charges." The big man hit Corey again, and again, and again. Each impact was measured, deliberate, not wild or angry, but professional. Like he'd done this 1,000 times, Corey took it, his face twisted in pain, but silent, enduring. Carl's hand went to his belt, where he carried a folding knife. Every instinct screamed at him to smash through that window, to protect his son. But something held him back. Years of training, of understanding that you needed intelligence before action. If he rushed in now, he'd win the fight. He had no doubt about that. But he wouldn't understand what he'd seen, wouldn't know who these men were or why Corey was submitting to this horror. The beating lasted 10 minutes. When it was done, the suit showed Corey something on the phone video playback. "Probably." Corey nodded, still on his knees, breathing hard. The 2 men left. Carl heard the apartment door close, heard their footsteps in the hall. He stayed on the fire escape, watching as Corey slowly got to his feet. His son moved like a man 50 years older, one hand pressed to his ribs. He went to the kitchen, pulled a bottle of whiskey from under the sink, and drank straight from it. Then he went to the whiteboard and drew a thick black X through today's date. Carl climbed back into the neighbor's apartment. The woman, mid-20s, dark hair, frightened eyes, stared at him. "Who are you?" she whispered. "That's my son in there. Did you see what happened?" She nodded slowly. "I hear it. Every time. I called the police once. But when they came, he told them everything was fine. They left." "How long has this been going on?" 6 months. Maybe longer. I moved in 5 months ago, and it was already happening." She hugged herself. "I'm Gloria. Gloria Case. I tried to talk to him once, to offer help, but he said I should mind my own business. He wasn't mean about it. Just firm. Like he needed me to stay out of it." Carl pulled out his wallet, extracted a business card. "If you see anything else, if anyone comes around asking questions about me, you call this number. Understand?" Gloria took the card. "Are you going to help him?" "Yes." Carl moved toward the door. "And if anyone asks, you never saw me." He went back to his motel, sat on the bed, and called Jay Kemp. It was past midnight, but Jay answered on the second ring. "I need everything," Carl said. "I need to know who those men were, what they're doing to my son, and why he's letting them do it. Tell me what you saw." Carl described it, the beating, the filming, the way Corey had endured it like some kind of ritual. When he finished, Jay was silent for a long moment. "Give me 48 hours, Jay finally said. "And Carl? Be careful. This sounds organized. Professional." Carl hung up and stared at the wall. His hands were shaking not with fear, but with rage. Someone was hurting his son. Someone was systematically beating Corey, and Corey was letting it happen. Which meant they had something on him, some leverage that made enduring that torture preferable to the alternative. Carl thought about Natalie, about the promises he'd made at her funeral. He'd promised to keep Corey safe, to be there when the kid needed him. He'd failed. Somehow, he let his son fall into this nightmare. But he was here now. And whoever was doing this to Corey, whoever had turned his brilliant, gentle son into a man who took beatings on his knees, was going to pay. Carl Blevins had hunted insurgents through the streets of Fallujah. He'd survived IED attacks and firefights. He'd built a business from nothing in a dying town and made it thrive. He could handle this. He just needed to understand it first. Then he'd burn it all down. Jay Kemp arrived in the city 2 days later with a file folder and a grim expression. They met at a diner in a different neighborhood, far from Corey's apartment. Jay slid the folder across the table. "Your son's in deep," Jay said. "Deeper than I've seen in a long time." Carl opened the folder. Inside were photographs, the black SUV, the two men, several other people entering and leaving a building downtown. Financial records, cell phone logs, a map with locations marked in red. The big guy is Brett Trujillo, Jay said. Former boxer, did time for aggravated assault. The suit is Jerome George. That's the one you need to worry about. Carl studied Jerome's photograph. Mid-40s, handsome in a predatory way, expensive clothes, cold eyes. Jerome runs what they call a proxy service, Jay continued. It's genius, in a sick way. Rich people commit crimes, DUIs, assaults, white-collar stuff. They pay Jerome's organization, and someone else takes the punishment. The proxy gets beaten, serves jail time, whatever. It's all documented on video, so the real criminal has proof they paid their penance. Kind of a substitute for legal consequences. Carl felt his coffee turn to acid in his stomach. And Corey's a proxy. Has been for 8 months. Started last April, right after he had some kind of medical emergency. Ambulance ride, 3-day hospital stay. The bills would have bankrupted him $60,000 after insurance. Jerome's organization approached him with an offer. They'd pay the debt. In exchange, he serves as a proxy. 1 session a month, sometimes 2. Why would anyone agree to that? Because the alternative is homelessness, bankruptcy, destroyed credit, and Jerome's good at finding people who are desperate and isolated. No family nearby, no support system. People who think they can endure anything because they've already lost what mattered most. Natalie. Corey had lost his mother, taken time off school, lost his momentum and direction. He was probably still drowning in grief when he got hit with those medical bills, and Jerome had found him. What was the medical emergency? Carl asked. Jay flipped through pages. Appendicitis. Emergency surgery. He waited too long before going to the hospital, almost died. Corey had been alone, probably scared, trying to tough it out. Just like he was toughing out the beatings now. Who were Jerome's clients? Carl asked. That's where it gets interesting. The current client, the one Corey took the beating for last Thursday, is Clint Ackerman. Real estate developer. Inherited money. Thinks the rules don't apply to him. He was arrested for DUI and assault 3 months ago. Punched a bartender who cut him off, then led cops on a chase through downtown. His lawyer worked some magic, got the criminal charges reduced to fines and community service. But his victims, the bartender and 2 people whose cars he damaged, were threatening civil suits. Bad publicity. So, Ackerman paid Jerome $300,000. Corey takes the beatings. It's all documented on video, and Ackerman's lawyer shows the victims. Look, justice has been served. My client has already suffered. The victims settle quietly. That's insane. It's brilliant. Dark, illegal, horrifying, but brilliant. Jerome's been running this operation for 3 years. He has 6 proxies currently on his roster. Young people, mostly men, all drowning in debt. He pays them well, $15,000 per session, enough to slowly dig out of their holes while sacrificing their bodies and dignity. Carl did the math. Corey was being beaten once or twice a month, making $15,000 to $30,000. Minus taxes? No, probably not minus taxes. This was cash. Underground money. That explained the large withdrawals from Corey's bank account. He was probably paying off the original debt, stashing away some savings. How does Jerome avoid getting caught? Carl asked. Compartmentalization. The proxies never meet each other. They never know who the real criminals are. Jerome keeps everything separated. The beating happens, the video gets delivered to the client, money changes hands. The proxies sign contracts that make them complicit in the fraud, so they can't go to the police without incriminating themselves. And the victims of the original crimes think they're getting justice, so they don't push it. What about Brett Trujillo? Muscle. He administers the beatings. Jerome has 4 guys like him, each handling different proxies. Brett's smart enough to do damage without causing permanent injury. It's all calculated. Broken ribs heal, bruises fade. Nothing that requires hospitalization or leaves lasting evidence. Carl closed the folder. His hands were steady now. He'd moved past rage into something colder, more focused. I need addresses, he said. Jerome's operation, where he lives, where he works. Ackerman too. And I need information on the other proxies. Carl. Jay's voice was careful. I know what you're thinking, but this isn't Fallujah. You can't just. I'm not going to kill anyone. Carl met his friend's eyes. Unless I have to. But I am going to end this. Jerome, Ackerman, anyone else involved, I'm going to make them pay for what they did to my son. The police can't touch him. You said it yourself. The proxies are complicit. Corey signed a contract. If the police raid Jerome's operation, Corey goes down with him. Fraud, conspiracy, maybe more. He'd lose everything and still have the debt hanging over him. Jay studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You're going to need help. I know. Can you stay for a while? Wouldn't miss it. But we need to be smart about this. Jerome's not some street thug. He's connected, protected. We go after him directly, it'll blow back on Corey. Then we don't go after him directly. Carl pulled out a notebook, started making a list. We go after his clients first. Cut off his revenue stream. Make his operation too expensive, too risky to continue. And we make sure everyone involved understands that hurting vulnerable people has consequences. You're going to wage a one-man war against an entire criminal organization. Not one man, two. Carl smiled thinly. And we're not going to war. We're going hunting. Over the next 3 days, Carl and Jay built their intelligence picture. They identified Jerome's operation center, an office building downtown that fronted as a consulting firm. They tracked Brett Trujillo's movements, photographed license plates, documented patterns. They found 2 of the other proxies, a young woman being beaten for a hedge fund manager's embezzlement charges, a man in his 30s taking punishment for a tech CEO's sexual harassment accusations. Carl watched it all from a distance, his rage refining itself into something purposeful. These people had built a business on suffering. They'd found desperate people and turned them into commodities, flesh to be damaged and documented. And the rich clients never faced consequences, never learned, never changed. But they were about to. On the 4th day, Carl waited outside Clint Ackerman's office building. Ackerman left at 6:30, headed to his car, a silver Porsche parked in a private garage. Carl followed on foot, moving through shadows. The garage was empty, cameras covering the entrance, but blind spots near the elevator. Carl stepped out as Ackerman approached his car. Mr. Ackerman. Ackerman turned, irritated. I don't give to panhandlers. I'm not a panhandler. I'm Carl Blevins. My son is Corey Jackson. For just a second, fear flickered across Ackerman's face. Then his expression hardened. I don't know who that is. Sure you do. You paid $300,000 for him to take your beating. For that DUI you committed, the bartender you assaulted. Carl moved closer. I saw the video. I saw what your proxy service did to my son. Ackerman's hand went to his pocket phone, probably, ready to call for help. Carl was faster. He grabbed Ackerman's wrist, twisted, and slammed him against the Porsche's hood. Not hard enough to injure, just hard enough to establish dominance. Here's what's going to happen, Carl said quietly. You're going to turn yourself in. You're going to confess to that DUI, the assault, all of it. You're going to make it right with the people you hurt. You're insane. Ackerman tried to struggle, but Carl's grip was iron. I'll call the police. I'll have you arrested for assault. Go ahead, and I'll tell them about Jerome George, about the proxy service, about how you paid someone to take your punishment. I have documentation, video evidence, financial records. You want that coming out? Ackerman went still. You're bluffing. Am I? Carl pulled out his phone with his free hand, showed Ackerman a photograph of one of Jerome's men entering the office building. I know where Jerome operates. I know who the other clients are. I know everything. And if you don't do exactly what I say, I'm going to make sure the world knows too. Jerome will kill you. Jerome can try. But first, I'll take him down. And you with him. Carl released Ackerman, stepped back. You have 24 hours. Turn yourself in, or I release everything to the FBI, the local police, and every news outlet in the city. Your choice. He walked away, leaving Ackerman slumped against his car. Behind him, he heard retching Ackerman throwing up from fear or stress, or both. Carl didn't look back. One down, many more to go. Clint Ackerman didn't turn himself in. Instead, he called Jerome George, panicked and desperate. J. Kemp's surveillance picked up the call they'd planted a bug on Ackerman's car during his conversation with Carl. Someone knows, Ackerman said on the recording. About the proxy. About everything. He threatened to go to the FBI. Jerome's response was calm, measured. Who was he? Father of the proxy, Carl something. Blevins. He had photographs, documentation, said he'd take us all down. And you believed him. He wasn't bluffing, Jerome. I could see it in his eyes. This guy's military. Dangerous. We need to shut this down, destroy the records. What we need, Jerome interrupted, is to handle the problem at its source. This Carl Blevins needs to understand that threatening my business has consequences. What are you going to do? Let me worry about that. You worry about keeping your mouth shut and staying calm. I'll take care of Mr. Blevins. The recording ended. Jay played it for Carl at the motel, his expression dark. They're coming for you, Jay said. Good. I was hoping they would. Carl, this isn't a game. Jerome's people are professionals. Brett Trujillo's been arrested 5 times for assault. They will hurt you. Let them try. Carl pulled out his notebook, showed Jay the plan he'd been developing. I want them to come after me. It'll take their focus off Corey and the other proxies. And when they do, we'll be ready. Jay studied the plan, then looked up at Carl with something like respect. You're using yourself as bait. I'm using myself as a weapon. There's a difference. The attack came 2 nights later. Carl was walking from the motel to his truck when 2 men stepped out of the shadows. Brett Trujillo and another enforcer, similar build, similar dead eyes. They moved with professional confidence, expecting an easy target. They were wrong. Carl had chosen this parking lot specifically because of its layout, narrow space between buildings, limited sight lines, no cameras. When Brett swung at him with a baton similar to the one he'd used on Corey, Carl was ready. He'd spent 40 hours training with Jay, practicing the specific movements he'd need. Carl caught the baton on his forearm. It hurt like hell, but the thick jacket absorbed most of the impact. He stepped inside Brett's guard, drove his elbow into the man's solar plexus. Brett grunted, staggered. The other enforcer came from the side with a knife. Carl pivoted, grabbed the man's wrist, and twisted until something snapped. The knife clattered to the pavement. The fight lasted 90 seconds. Carl was older than these men, but he'd been forged in environments where hesitation meant death. He fought with brutal efficiency, strikes to nerve clusters, joint manipulations, a palm heel to Brett's nose that sent blood spraying. When both men were on the ground, Carl collected the knife and the baton. Tell Jerome, Carl said, breathing hard, that he picked the wrong father to mess with. He walked away, got in his truck, and drove to a different motel across town. His forearm was bruised where the baton had landed, his knuckles split and bleeding. He cleaned the wounds, iced the bruises, and called Jay. Phase 1 complete, Carl said. They know I'm not easy prey. Now we move to Phase 2. Phase 2 was information warfare. Over the next week, Carl and Jay systematically exposed Jerome's operation. They sent anonymous packages to the FBI containing financial records, video evidence, and detailed documentation of the proxy service. They leaked information to investigative journalists at 3 major news outlets. They created a website with encrypted uploads where victims of crimes could see how their perpetrators had avoided real consequences. Most importantly, they contacted the other proxies. Carl personally visited each one, showed them the evidence he'd gathered, and offered them a choice. Continue being victimized, or help bring Jerome down. The young woman being beaten for the hedge fund manager's crimes broke first. Her name was Crystal Crawford, 24 years old, drowning in student loan debt. She'd been in Jerome's service for 6 months, had taken 4 beatings, and was so traumatized she couldn't sleep without medication. He said, I signed a contract, Crystal told Carl, sitting in her tiny apartment with the blinds drawn, that if I went to the police, I'd go to jail too. That contract was signed under duress, Carl said. You were coerced. Any decent lawyer could argue you're a victim, not a perpetrator. You don't understand. Jerome has connections. Judges, police, lawyers. He's protected. He was protected. Not anymore. I've already started burning his operation down. The FBI has his financial records. Journalists are digging into his clients. And I'm going to make sure he faces justice for what he did to you, to my son, to everyone else. Crystal stared at him, tears running down her face. Why are you doing this? Because nobody helped my son when he needed it. Because Jerome preys on people who think they have no options. Because somebody needs to. Crystal agreed to cooperate. So did the other proxy, a man named Stephen Hurst, 29, former teacher who'd lost his job and health insurance in the same month he was diagnosed with MS. The medical bills had destroyed him, and Jerome had found him at his lowest point. With their testimony, Carl had everything he needed. But he wasn't going to the authorities yet. Not until he'd handled Jerome and his operation personally. Because Carl had realized something. Jerome's protection came from his clients' wealthy, powerful people who wanted his service to continue. Take away those clients, show them real consequences, and Jerome became just another criminal without a shield. So, Carl started hunting the clients. The tech CEO who'd paid to have Stephen Hurst beaten for sexual harassment charges. Carl leaked evidence of the original misconduct to the press, then showed up at his house with video of Stephen's beating. The CEO resigned within 48 hours and checked himself into a rehabilitation facility. The hedge fund manager who'd hired Crystal's proxy service Carl exposed his embezzlement scheme to his board of directors, then ensured his wife knew about the affairs he'd been covering up. The manager fled to the Cayman Islands, but his assets were frozen pending investigation. One by one, Carl dismantled Jerome's client base. Some he exposed, some he blackmailed. Some he simply visited, showing them what he was capable of, making them understand that using Jerome's service would bring hell down on their heads. It took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of methodical, relentless pressure. And at the end of those 3 weeks, Jerome George's phone stopped ringing. His revenue stream dried up, his protection evaporated. Carl had left him isolated, exposed, and desperate. Now came the final move. Jerome George lived in a penthouse downtown, the kind of place that required security clearance and valet parking. Carl and Jay studied it for 2 days, identifying vulnerabilities. The security was good, but not perfect. Cameras covered the entrance and parking garage, but the service entrance had a blind spot. Delivery personnel came and went with minimal screening. Carl waited until Thursday evening, the same day of the week when Corey had taken his beatings. There was a symmetry to it that Carl appreciated. He entered through the service entrance, wearing a maintenance uniform, carrying a toolbox. The security guard barely glanced at him. Carl had the posture and confidence of someone who belonged. He took the service elevator to the penthouse level, then used a copied keycard courtesy of a bribed security guard to access Jerome's private hallway. Jerome's door had a sophisticated lock. Carl bypassed it with tools Jay had provided, slipping inside quietly. The apartment was elegant and cold, modern furniture, expensive art, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. No photographs. No personal touches. Like a showroom rather than a home. Carl heard voices from deeper in the apartment. He moved silently across marble floors, following the sound to a home office. Through the cracked door, he saw Jerome on the phone, pacing. "I don't care what it costs," Jerome was saying. "Find this Carl Blevins. Find his family, his business, everything he cares about. And then we'll show him what happens when you interfere with my operation." Carl pushed the door open. "No need to search. I'm right here." Jerome spun, dropping the phone. His hand went to a desk drawer. Gun? Probably, but Carl crossed the room in 3 steps and kicked the drawer shut. Jerome stumbled backward, and Carl grabbed him by the throat, slammed him against the wall hard enough to rattle picture frames. "You made a business out of hurting people who couldn't fight back," Carl said quietly. "You found my son at his lowest point and turned him into your victim. How does it feel, Jerome, being the one who's helpless? You don't understand." Jerome choked the words out. "This is just business. Supply and demand. Nobody forced those people to." Carl drove his fist into Jerome's stomach, doubling him over. "You forced them. You found desperate people and gave them impossible choices. You made them complicit in their own victimization." He hauled Jerome upright again. "But that ends tonight. The police already have everything they need. Videos, financial records, testimony from your victims. By tomorrow morning, your operation will be dismantled. Your assets seized. You'll spend the next 20 years in federal prison." Carl smiled without humor. "But before that happens, you're going to understand what you put my son through." Jerome's eyes widened. "No. Please. Please?" Carl's voice went ice cold. "Did you listen when Corey said please? When Crystal Crawford begged to stop? When Stephen Hurst cried from pain?" He pulled out his phone, opened the camera. "I'm going to document this, just like you documented their suffering. And then I'm going to make sure everyone sees exactly what kind of man you are." What happened next took 20 minutes. Carl didn't kill Jerome. He'd promised himself he wouldn't, not unless absolutely necessary. But he made sure Jerome felt every moment of fear, helplessness, and pain that his victims had experienced. He used the same baton Brett Trujillo had used on Corey. The same measured, professional brutality, and he filmed it all. When it was done, Jerome was on the floor, sobbing, bleeding, broken. Carl stood over him, breathing hard. "The video goes to the FBI tomorrow," Carl said, "along with everything else. You're finished, Jerome. Your business is dead, your protection is gone, and you're going to pay for every life you destroyed." He left Jerome there and walked out of the penthouse. Jay was waiting in the parking garage with the truck running. Carl climbed in, and they drove away. "Is it done?" Jay asked. "Almost. One more thing." They drove to Brett Trujillo's apartment. Brett answered the door with a beer in hand, still sporting bruises from his fight with Carl 3 weeks ago. He saw Carl and tried to slam the door shut. Carl kicked it open, sending Brett sprawling. "Here's how this works," Carl said, stepping inside. "Tomorrow morning, you're going to the police. You're going to confess to everything, every beating you administered, every victim you hurt. You're going to testify against Jerome and his clients. You're going to cooperate fully. And if I don't," Brett was trying for bravado, but his voice shook. "Then I'll make sure you face consequences for every crime you committed. Assault, battery, conspiracy, racketeering. I have evidence that puts you in Jerome's organization for 3 years. Hundreds of beatings, dozens of victims. You'll die in prison." Carl leaned in close. "Or you can cooperate, get a reduced sentence, and be out in 5 to 7 years. Your choice." Brett stared at him, then slowly nodded. Okay, I'll cooperate." "Smart man." Carl turned to leave, then paused. "And Brett, if you ever hurt another person, if I even hear rumors that you're back to your old ways, I'll come for you. And next time, I won't be so polite." He left Brett there, shaking and pale, and returned to the truck. "Now it's done?" Carl said. The next morning, Carl drove to Corey's apartment. It was early, before 7. He knocked, and Corey opened the door in sweatpants and a t-shirt. Looking confused. "Dad? What are you? Can I come in?" Corey stepped aside, nervous. Carl entered and went straight to the whiteboard with its calendar. He picked up the marker and started drawing X's on every remaining Thursday. Corey watched, confused, until Carl finished and turned to face him. "It's over," Carl said. "Jerome's operation, the proxy service, all of it. The FBI is raiding his office this morning. His enforcers are cooperating with authorities. His clients are being exposed and prosecuted." He met his son's eyes. "You're free, Corey. You don't have to take another beating. Ever?" Corey's face went through a dozen emotions. Disbelief, hope, fear, relief. How did you?" "I saw what they did to you. I couldn't let it continue." Carl moved to the couch, sat down heavily. "You should have told me. You should have asked for help." "I couldn't." Corey's voice broke. "The debt, the contract," Jerome said. "If I told anyone he'd make sure I went to prison, that I'd lose everything." Jerome was lying. He controlled you with fear, but that's over now. Carl stood, pulled his son into a hug. Corey resisted for a moment, then collapsed against his father, sobbing. Years of pain and fear and loneliness came pouring out. Carl held him, the way he'd held him when he was a child, when Natalie died, when the world felt too big and cruel. "I'm sorry," Corey choked out. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you. I'm sorry I was so weak." "You're not weak. You survived. You endured, and now you get to heal." Carl pulled back, looked at his son. "But we're going to do it together. No more isolation. No more pretending you're okay when you're not. You're going to move back home for a while. See a therapist. Let people help you." "What about the debt?" "Already handled. I paid off your medical bills yesterday. Consider it a late birthday present." Corey stared at him. "Dad, that's $60,000. And you're worth every penny." Carl smiled. "Now pack a bag. We're leaving in an hour." Over the next 3 months, Jerome George's empire crumbled. The FBI investigation revealed the full scope of his operation: dozens of victims, hundreds of beatings, millions of dollars in illegal revenue. Jerome was charged with racketeering, conspiracy, fraud, assault, and a dozen other crimes. Brett Trujillo cooperated with prosecutors and received a 7-year sentence. Jerome got 35 years without possibility of parole. The clients faced their own reckonings. Some went to prison. Some lost their careers and reputations. Some, like Clint Ackerman, fled the country but found their assets frozen and their names permanently associated with the scandal. The victims they'd harmed, the bartender Ackerman assaulted, the employees the tech CEO harassed, received settlements and public acknowledgement of the injustices they'd suffered. Crystal Crawford and Stephen Hurst both testified against Jerome. With Carl's support and legal assistance, they were granted immunity in exchange for their cooperation. Both were working with therapists to process their trauma. Crystal had returned to school. Stephen was managing his MS with proper medical care and had published an essay about his experience that went viral, raising awareness about predatory debt practices. Corey moved back home to Carl's small town. He found a job at a local tech company, started seeing a therapist twice a week, and slowly began to rebuild his life. The physical injuries healed faster than the psychological ones. It took months before he could go a day without nightmares, longer before he could be in a room with strangers without anxiety attacks. But he was getting better, stronger. 6 months after Jerome's arrest, Corey and Carl were having dinner on Carl's back porch when Corey finally asked the question that had been hanging between them. "How did you do it, Dad? How did you take down an entire criminal organization?" Carl considered his answer carefully. "I didn't take it down. I exposed it. Jerome's operation only worked because it stayed hidden, because his victims felt powerless and his clients felt protected. Once I brought everything into the light, the whole structure collapsed. But you could have died. Brett and Jerome's other guys, they could have killed you. Maybe, but you're my son. I wasn't going to let them hurt you." Carl met Corey's eyes. "I know I haven't always been there. After your mom died, I didn't know how to help you. I thought giving you space, letting you handle things on your own, was the right approach. But I should have been more present. I should have known something was wrong. You couldn't have known. I hid it well. I should have looked harder." Carl reached across the table, squeezed Corey's hand. "But I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sunset paint the sky orange and red. Carl thought about the past 6 months, the investigation, the violence, the satisfaction of watching Jerome's empire burn. He'd never told Corey about the beating he'd administered to Jerome in that penthouse. Never shared the full extent of what he'd done. Some things a father kept to himself. But he'd achieved what he set out to do. His son was safe. The people who'd hurt him were punished. And Carl had sent a message to anyone who thought they could prey on the vulnerable. There were still people in this world who would fight back. 3 weeks later, Carl received a letter from the FBI. They wanted to meet with him to discuss his role in exposing Jerome's operation. Carl brought his lawyer, the same one who'd helped Crystal and Stephen secure immunity and prepared for consequences. The FBI agent, a stern woman named Kelsey Washington, laid out photographs on the conference room table. "Mr. Blevins, we know you did more than just gather evidence. We know you confronted several of Jerome's clients. We know you assaulted Brett Trujillo and Jerome George. Under normal circumstances, we'd be arresting you." "Under normal circumstances," Carl agreed. "But these aren't normal circumstances. You exposed a criminal organization that had been operating undetected for 3 years. You protected multiple victims and gathered evidence that's leading to dozens of convictions. And, frankly, Jerome George's beating, while illegal, doesn't have any witnesses willing to testify against you. Jerome certainly isn't going to admit a civilian got the better of him." Carl kept his expression neutral. "What happens now?" Agent Washington studied him. "Now you go home. You leave this kind of work to law enforcement. And you don't take the law into your own hands again." She leaned forward. "But unofficially, thank you. What you did for those victims, for your son, that took courage." Carl left the FBI office a free man. As he drove home, he thought about Gloria Case, the young woman who'd let him use her fire escape that first night. She testified about what she'd heard through the walls, providing crucial corroboration for the prosecution. Carl had made sure she received witness protection and financial support to relocate. She was in graduate school now, studying criminal justice, determined to help prevent what had happened to her neighbor from happening to others. He thought about Jay Kemp, who'd put his reputation and business on the line to help a friend. Jay had returned to Denver, but called every week to check in, to make sure Carl and Corey were doing okay. He thought about all the victims Jerome had created, the lives destroyed by his operation. They were healing now, slowly but surely. And he thought about Corey, who'd endured hell and was coming out the other side stronger for it. When Carl got home, Corey was in the garage, working on an old motorcycle they were restoring together. It was something they'd started as therapy, a project that required patience, focus, and working with their hands. Corey looked up as Carl entered, grease on his face, something like peace in his eyes. How'd it go with the FBI? No charges. They called me a concerned citizen who got lucky. Corey grinned. Lucky. Right. He turned back to the motorcycle. Dad? I've been thinking, once we finish this bike, maybe we should restore another one. Start a little business. Father-son thing. Carl felt warmth spread through his chest. I like that. They worked together in comfortable silence, tools clicking, the radio playing quietly in the background. This, Carl thought, was what he'd been fighting for. Not revenge, not justice, not even stopping Jerome's operation. This moment right here, his son alive, healing, and planning a future. The whiteboard with its black X's was long gone, thrown in the trash the day they left Corey's apartment. But Carl still remembered it, still felt the cold shock of realization that had driven him to action. That whiteboard had been a symbol of everything wrong in the world's systematic cruelty, helplessness, isolation. But it had also been a catalyst. A warning sign that Carl had recognized and responded to, despite the danger, despite the difficulty. He'd saved his son not through violence alone, but through determination, intelligence, and an unwillingness to accept that some people were simply beyond help. 3 months later, Carl's construction company received a contract to renovate the building that had housed Jerome's operation. The city was converting it into a resource center for people struggling with debt and predatory lending. Carl took the job for free, hiring Crystal Crawford as a project coordinator and Stephen Hurst as an advisor. Together, they transformed Jerome's former headquarters into something that would actually help people. On the day of the grand opening, Corey stood beside Carl as local officials gave speeches about supporting vulnerable populations. Carl noticed his son's hands were steady, his posture confident. The nightmares had faded. The anxiety attacks were rare now. Corey was returning to school part-time, planning to finish his degree not in pre-med, but in social work. I want to help people like me, Corey had explained. People who feel trapped. I want them to know there's always another option, always someone who cares. As the ribbon-cutting ceremony concluded, a young man approached Carl nervously. He was mid-20s, thin, with a haunted look Carl had learned to recognize. Mr. Blevins? My name is Donnie Delaney. I heard about what you did, how you helped those people. His voice dropped to a whisper. I think I'm in a situation like your son was. I don't know where else to turn. Carl put a hand on the young man's shoulder, gentle but firm. You came to the right place. Let's talk. He glanced back at Corey, who nodded understanding. They discussed this possibility that Carl's actions would inspire others to come forward, to seek help. They prepared resources, contacts, a network of support. As Carl walked with Donnie Delaney into the resource center, away from the celebrating crowd, he realized that what he'd started 6 months ago wasn't over. It had evolved. Changed from a personal mission of rescue and revenge into something larger. A commitment to helping people who felt helpless, to being the person he wished had been there for Corey from the beginning. The black X's on that whiteboard had marked days of suffering, but they'd also marked the beginning of something new, a father's determination to protect his son, a son's journey toward healing, and a reminder that even in the darkest moments, when systems fail and evil seems triumphant, there are still people willing to fight back. Carl Blevins had been one of those people, and he wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.